Get your bag and get off this plane now, or I'm going to have you dragged off in handcuffs." The scream pierced the expensive hush of the first-class cabin, shattering the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Every head turned. In seat 1A, a woman in a grey, oversized hoodie sat perfectly still, her hands resting calmly on a leather-bound notebook. Looming over her was a flight attendant, with a vein throbbing in her forehead, pointing a manicured finger toward the exit. "I'm not asking you again," the attendant hissed, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of rage and authority. "You people always think you can sneak in here. Security is on the way." The woman in the hoodie didn't flinch. She just adjusted her glasses, looked the attendant dead in the eye, and whispered 4 words that would cost the airline $50 million. "Make the call, Patricia." The rain at JFK was relentless, hammering against the fuselage of the massive Regal Atlantic Airways Boeing 777. Inside the terminal, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool and expensive coffee. But inside the exclusive first-class cabin of Flight 902 to London Heathrow, the atmosphere was meant to be a sanctuary. Patricia Miller, the lead purser for Regal Atlantic, prided herself on running her cabin with military precision. She was 48, wore her blonde hair in a tight, motionless bun, and had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She viewed the first-class cabin not as a service area, but as her personal kingdom. She knew the regulars, the senators, the hedge fund managers, the oil heirs. She knew how they liked their scotch and which mistresses they were traveling with. Then she saw the woman in 1A. The passenger had boarded last, slipping in just before the doors closed. She wasn't wearing the usual uniform of the first-class elite. There was no Laura Piana cashmere coat, no flashy Rolex, no Rimowa aluminum carry-on. Instead, she wore a charcoal grey hoodie, black leggings, and battered Nike sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she carried a canvas tote bag that looked like it had seen better days. Patricia stood in the galley, narrowing her eyes, as she watched the woman settle into the most expensive seat on the plane. Seat 1A was usually reserved for royalty or CEOs. A round-trip ticket in that pod cost upwards of $18,000. "Did you check her boarding pass?" Patricia snapped at Reese, a junior flight attendant, who was nervously arranging the pre-flight champagne. Reese jumped. "Yes, Patty. I mean, the gate agent scanned it. She's listed as V. Banks." Patricia scoffed, crossing her arms. "V. Banks? Probably some employee non-rev flying on a buddy pass who got lucky, or an upgrade glitch. Look at her. She looks like she's here to clean the seat, not sit in it." "She was very polite," Reese offered weakly. "Polite doesn't pay for jet fuel, Reese," Patricia muttered. She grabbed a bottle of sparkling water, not the Dom Perignon they served to the real guests, and marched down the aisle. Vivien Banks was exhausted. It had been a grueling week of negotiations in New York involving the acquisition of a failing logistics firm, and all she wanted was to sleep for 6 hours until they touched down in London. She had deliberately dressed down. When you are worth $3 billion, you stop caring if people are impressed by your shoes. You just want to be comfortable. She had just closed her eyes when a shadow fell over her. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through her noise-cancelling headphones. Vivien slid the headphones off and looked up. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Patricia, was looming over her with a tight, predatory smile. "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" Vivien blinked, confused. "I already scanned it at the gate, and the other attendant checked it at the door." "I understand that," Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension, like she was speaking to a slow child. "But we have a discrepancy in our manifest. Seat 1A is a very exclusive suite. I need to verify you are actually supposed to be here." Vivien sighed. She didn't have the energy for this. She dug into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen. She held up the digital boarding pass. Vivien Banks, Seat 1A, Zone 1. Patricia stared at the screen, looking for a flaw. She frowned. This is a screenshot. Anyone can forge a screenshot. I need to see the active app, or a paper ticket. It's in the Airline's app, Vivien said, calmly, tapping the refresh button to show it was live. Is there a problem? Patricia didn't look at the phone. She looked at Vivien. She looked at the hoodie. She looked at the messy hair. In Patricia's mind, the math didn't add up. First class was for people who looked like money. This woman looked like someone who should be in row 58 near the toilets. The problem, Patricia lowered her voice, leaning in so the man in 1K, a wealthy banker named Arthur Sterling, wouldn't hear, is that we have a high-priority passenger who actually paid full fare for this seat arriving late. And I suspect you might be a system error. Vivien's eyebrows shot up. A system error? I paid for this ticket. Full fare. I highly doubt that. Patricia chuckled darkly. Look, let's save us both the embarrassment. Why don't you grab your things and I'll find you a nice seat in premium economy? There's plenty of legroom, and you won't feel so out of place. Vivien stared at her. The exhaustion was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She recognized this behavior. She had seen it in boardrooms, in high-end boutiques, and at country clubs. It was the specific arrogance of someone with a little bit of power who couldn't stand the idea of a black woman existing in a space of luxury without permission. I am not moving, Vivien said, her voice dropping an octave. I am in my assigned seat. Now, if you don't mind, I would like a glass of champagne. The 2012 vintage, please, not the sparkling water you're holding. Patricia's face turned a blotchy shade of red. The audacity. I am the lead purser on this aircraft, Patricia snapped, abandoning the fake whisper. And I determine who is suitable for this cabin. You are being disruptive. I'm sitting still, Vivien countered. You are the one barking at passengers. That's it. Patricia straightened up, her chest heaving. Reese, call the gate. Tell them to get the ground security coordinator on board. We have a non-compliant passenger attempting to steal a first-class suite. The cabin went silent. Arthur Sterling in 1K lowered his Financial Times. Vivien didn't move. She didn't yell. She simply opened her leather notebook, uncapped a fountain pen, and wrote down the time. 10:14 p.m. You're making a mistake, Vivien said softly. The only mistake, Patricia sneered, was letting you turn left at the door. The jet bridge was still attached, and the humid New York air rushed in as two large men in high-visibility vests stomped onto the plane. One was a Port Authority officer, the other a private security contractor for the airline named Gary. Patricia met them at the galley, pointing an accusing finger toward Seat 1A like she was identifying a murderer. She refuses to leave, Patricia told Gary, her voice raising so the whole cabin could hear. She's belligerent. She's refusing crew instructions, and I suspect her ticket is fraudulent. I want her off my plane. I don't feel safe flying with her. The safety card. It was the ultimate trump card in aviation. Once a crew member claimed they didn't feel safe, the passenger was finished. No questions asked. Gary, a burly man who looked like he'd rather be eating a sandwich than dealing with drama, sighed and walked over to 1A. He looked at Vivien, who was still calmly sitting with her notebook. Ma'am, Gary said, his hand resting near his belt. The crew wants you off. You got to grab your bags and come with us. Vivien looked up over her glasses. On what grounds? Interfering with a flight crew. Trespassing. Look, lady, don't make this hard. If we have to drag you, we will. And then you're going to jail. I have a valid ticket, Vivien stated, holding her ground. I am the majority shareholder of a company that does significant business with this airline. I suggest you check the manifest properly. Patricia laughed from the aisle. Oh, listen to her. Now she's a shareholder. Last week it was probably, I know the pilot. Ma'am, you are wearing sweatpants. Please stop lying. Arthur Sterling, the banker in 1K, decided to chime in. He was a man accustomed to schedules. I say, he boomed in a posh British accent. Can we just get on with it? Some of us have meetings in London. Just remove her so we can leave. You heard him, Patricia said triumphantly. You are delaying the flight. You are inconveniencing these important people. Vivien turned to Arthur Sterling. I have a meeting in London too, Arthur. Ours is at 2 p.m. at the Shard. I believe we're discussing your bank's liquidity issues. Arthur froze. His eyes bulged. He squinted at the woman in the hoodie. He knew the name of the investor coming to save his bank, Vivien Banks of the Helios Group. But he had never met her in person. He had expected a suit, a team of lawyers, not a woman in a hoodie being yelled at by a flight attendant. Wait, Arthur stammered, but Patricia cut him off. Don't let her harass the passengers, Gary. Get her out! Gary reached out and grabbed Vivien's upper arm. His grip was tight. Okay, that's it. Up, now! Vivien flinched at the contact. Do not touch me. Then walk, Gary barked, yanking her arm. Vivien stood up. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence that suddenly filled the small cabin. She shook Gary's hand off her arm with a sharp, violent motion. She smoothed down her hoodie. Fine, Vivien said. Her voice was ice cold. I will deplane. But I want everyone to remember this moment, especially you, Patricia. She reached into a tote bag. Gary tensed, reaching for his taser, thinking she was going for a weapon. Vivien pulled out a black card. Not a credit card. A heavy titanium ID badge with a gold chip and the logo of a massive holding company, the Vanguard Group. But underneath that logo was a smaller, more discreet crest, the crest of Regal Atlantic Airways. She held it up. Do you know what this is, Patricia? Patricia squinted. She didn't recognize it. It wasn't a crew ID. I don't care about your library card. Get off. Vivien chuckled. It was a terrifying sound. I'll get off, but I'm taking my plane with me. You're... what? Patricia blinked. I said, Vivien walked into the aisle, standing toe-to-toe with the purser. I'm taking my plane. This aircraft, tail number G-VANG, is owned by Vanguard Leasing. I am the CEO of Vanguard. We lease this specific aircraft to Regal Atlantic. Vivien turned to the security guards. You want me off the plane? Fine. I am terminating the lease agreement for this aircraft effective immediately due to breach of contract regarding passenger safety and discrimination. This plane is no longer authorized to fly under Regal Atlantic's banner. Everyone has to get off. The pilot, the crew, the passengers, everyone. The silence that followed was heavier than the plane itself. Patricia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You're bluffing, she whispered. Vivien pulled out her phone and dialed a number on speaker. It rang once. Mrs. Banks? A deep voice answered. It was loud enough for the cabin to hear. This is unexpected. Is everything all right with the flight? No, David, Vivien said, staring directly into Patricia's terrified eyes. This is Vivien. I'm on flight 902. I need you to contact the tower and flight ops. I am evoking clause 14B of our leasing agreement. Immediate asset seizure. We are grounding the bird. Understood, the voice on the phone said instantly. Grounding G-Vang. I'll call the tower now. Give me 2 minutes." Vivien hung up. She looked around the stunned cabin. "Well?" Vivien gestured to the door. "You wanted me off? Let's all go. Flight's cancelled." The chaos that ensued was unlike anything JFK Terminal 4 had seen in years. Within 3 minutes of Vivien's phone call, the pilot, Captain James Ford, stormed out of the cockpit. He was a grey-haired man who had flown for 30 years. He looked bewildered. "Who is the lead here?" he barked at the galley. Patricia, pale and shaking, pointed a trembling hand at Vivien, who was standing by the open door, waiting. "Captain," Vivien said smoothly, "I believe operations has just contacted you?" Captain Ford looked at his iPad, which was pinging with urgent red notifications. "Do not take off. Asset frozen. Return to gate." "You're Vivien Banks." The captain's face went white. He knew the name. Everyone in upper management knew the name. Vanguard Leasing owned 40% of Regal Atlantic's long-haul fleet. They were the money behind the wings. "I am," Vivien said. "And your purser here, Miss Miller, decided that I didn't look the part of a first-class passenger. She had security put hands on me. She publicly humiliated me. So I'm taking my ball and going home." "Ms. Miller," Captain Ford turned slowly to Patricia. His voice was a low growl. "What did you do?" I thought she was a non-rev. She was wearing a hoodie. She wouldn't show me a paper ticket." Patricia's voice was climbing into hysteria. "She didn't belong. She owns the damn plane, Patricia," the captain roared. The passengers were now standing up, grumbling and shouting. Arthur Sterling looked like he was about to be sick. "Mrs. Banks," the captain pleaded, stepping forward. "Please. This is a misunderstanding. We have 300 souls on board. If you cancel this lease, we have to deplane everyone. It will cost the airline millions in rebooking, fees, fines." 50 million by my estimate, Vivien said coolly. "Perhaps more if the stock takes a hit when the news breaks tomorrow. And it will break. I have 4 million followers on LinkedIn, Captain. Please," the captain begged. "Don't do this to the other passengers. Don't do this to the crew who had nothing to do with this." Vivien looked back at the economy cabin. She saw a young mother with a crying baby. She saw an elderly couple. She took a deep breath. She wasn't cruel. She was just angry. "Fine," Vivien said. "I will allow the flight to continue, under 3 conditions." "Name them," the captain said instantly. Vivien held up 3 fingers. 1. Patricia gets off. Now. She does not fly to London. She is relieved of duty immediately. Patricia gasped, clutching her chest. "You can't! I have seniority. I have a union." 2. Vivien ignored her. "I want a formal written apology from the CEO of Regal Atlantic waiting for me when I land in Heathrow." "Done," the captain said. And 3. Vivien turned her gaze to Patricia, who was now crying, realizing her 20-year career was incinerating in front of her. Patricia keeps her job for now, but she doesn't fly first class. She doesn't fly business. Vivien smiled, but it was a shark's smile. If she stays on this plane, she works the economy toilets for the entire 7-hour flight, and I want her to personally apologize to every single passenger she judged on her way back there. The captain looked at Patricia. "You heard the lady. Hand over your manifest to Reese. Get in the back, or get off the plane and hand in your badge." Patricia looked around. The security guards were avoiding her eyes. Arthur Sterling was staring at the floor. Reese, the junior attendant she had bullied for months, was holding out her hand for the manifest, a tiny smirk playing on her lips. Patricia Miller, the queen of the cabin, hung her head. She handed the paperwork to Reese. I'll go to the back," she whispered. "Excellent," Vivien said. She sat back down in seat 1A. "Reese, could I have that glass of 2012 champagne now? And maybe some warm nuts?" The seatbelt sign pinged off with a soft, melodious chime, signaling that Flight 902 had reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. For the passengers in first class, this was usually the cue for the real service to begin. The hot towels, the warm macadamia nuts, the heavy crystal tumblers of scotch clinking against tray tables. For Vivien Banks in seat 1A, it was the first moment of peace she had felt in 48 hours. She reclined her seat into a semi-lounge position, the soft leather humming as the motors adjusted. Reese, the young flight attendant who had been terrified moments ago, approached her with a tentative grace. Reese's hands were shaking slightly as she placed a linen napkin on Vivien's tray table, followed by a chilled glass of the 2012 Dom Perignon. "Miss Banks," Reese whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. Nobody has ever stood up to Patricia like that. She's made a lot of us cry in the galley." Vivien took a sip of the champagne, the bubbles sharp and crisp against her palate. She looked at Reese, really looked at her, noting the frayed edges of her patience and the genuine kindness in her eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Reese," Vivien said, her voice warm. "People like Patricia thrive on silence. They bank on the fact that we're too polite or too scared to make a scene. Tonight, I just didn't feel like being polite." Reese smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "Is there anything else I can get you? The menu tonight features a miso-glazed sea bass or the filet mignon. The sea bass, please. And Reese, you're doing a great job. Run this cabin like you own it." Reese nodded, standing a little taller as she walked away to serve the other passengers. Across the aisle in seat 1K, Arthur Sterling was not relaxing. The British banker was sweating profusely, despite the cabin being a perfectly climate-controlled 68 degrees. He was the managing director of Sterling and Company, a boutique investment bank in London that was currently teetering on the edge of insolvency. His meeting tomorrow at the Shard was his Hail Mary pass. He was meeting with the Helios Group to beg for a capital injection. He had spent the last week researching the CEO of Helios. He knew the stats. Vivien Banks, 42 years old, self-made billionaire, ruthlessly efficient, notoriously private. He had built a mental image of a shark in a Chanel suit. He had not expected the woman in the hoodie who had just effectively hijacked the plane. Arthur cleared his throat, adjusting his tie nervously. He couldn't ignore her. If he ignored her now, the meeting tomorrow would be a bloodbath. He had to pivot. He had to charm. "I say," Arthur began, his voice cracking slightly. He turned his body toward her pod. "Ms. Banks, I feel I must apologize for my earlier outburst. The stress of travel, you understand. I had no idea who you were." Vivien turned her head slowly. She didn't smile. Her expression was neutral, the kind of look one gives a bug they are deciding whether or not to step on. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice smooth. "You didn't apologize because you were rude. You're apologizing because you found out I have the power to buy your bank and dismantle it for parts." Arthur choked. Surely that's a harsh interpretation." "Is it?" Vivien turned her body fully toward him. "You were quite vocal about getting on with it, when you thought I was just an inconveniencing black woman in sweatpants. You were worried about your schedule. Now that you know I'm the checkbook you're praying for, suddenly you have time for conversation." Arthur went pale. He picked up his water glass, his hand trembling. "I'll see you at 2 p.m. tomorrow, Arthur," Vivien said, dismissing him. "Try to get some sleep. You're going to need your wits about you. I ask very specific questions about liquidity ratios." She put her noise-cancelling headphones back on, effectively ending the interaction. Arthur Sterling sank back into his seat, staring at the ceiling, realizing he had just failed the first test of the most important merger of his life before the plane even crossed the Atlantic. Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, a very different reality was unfolding. The economy cabin of the Boeing 777 was packed. It was a full flight, 300 seats, every single one occupied. The air was thick with the smell of reheated pasta and humanity. Babies were crying in row 45. A group of college students on a study abroad trip were laughing loudly in row 32. And Patricia Miller was currently on her hands and knees in the aisle of row 58, wiping up vomit. "I am so sorry," the mother of the air-sick child said, looking mortified. He ate too much candy before we boarded." Patricia's jaw was clenched so hard her teeth ached. The blue rubber gloves she wore felt like shackles. Usually, in situations like this, she would have dispatched a junior flight attendant, someone like Reese, to handle the biohazard. Patricia would have stayed in the first-class galley, sipping an espresso and gossiping about the pilots. But Captain Ford had been crystal clear. Patricia works the back, all of it. "It's fine," Patricia gritted out, spraying disinfectant on the carpet. The smell was acrid, mixing with the vomit to create a nausea-inducing cocktail. "Miss!" A man in 58C tapped her on the shoulder. "Miss, I've been pressing the call button for 20 minutes. I need a gin and tonic." Patricia stood up, her knees cracking. She turned to the man. He was wearing a tank top and looked already intoxicated. "Sir, I am currently cleaning up a biohazard," Patricia snapped, her old instincts flaring up. "You can wait," the man frowned. "Hey, watch the attitude. You're a waitress in the sky, lady. Get me my drink or I'm reporting you." Patricia's eyes widened. The rage boiled up in her throat. A waitress in the sky? She was a lead purser. She had flown dignitaries. She had shaken hands with Bill Clinton. "I am not a waitress," she hissed. "I am the senior crew member on this." "Actually, you're not." The voice came from behind her. It was Gary, the security contractor who had almost dragged Vivien off the plane. He was walking the aisle to stretch his legs. He looked at Patricia with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Captain stripped your rank for this leg, Patty," Gary said quietly. "You're just crew, and the lady in 1A is watching. I wouldn't make a scene if I were you." Patricia froze. She looked down the long, endless tunnel of the aisle toward the curtain that separated the classes. She couldn't see Vivien, but she could feel her presence. The weight of that black titanium ID card pressed on her memory. She swallowed her pride. It tasted like ash. "I'll get your gin, sir," she whispered to the man in 58C. "And make it a double," the man grunted, turning back to his movie. Patricia retreated to the rear galley. She pulled the curtain shut and leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the food cart. Tears pricked her eyes. This wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. She had just been doing her job. That woman looked suspicious. How was she supposed to know she was a billionaire? It was a trap. "Patty?" It was Kevin, one of the other economy attendants. He was a young guy, 25, who usually deferred to Patricia's bullying. Now, he looked at her with an odd expression. "What?" Patricia snapped, wiping her eyes. "Toilet 4 is clogged again. Someone tried to flush a diaper. Your closest." Patricia stared at him. "You do it, Kevin." Kevin shook his head. "Captain's orders. He said you handle all sanitation issues on this flight. He wants to make sure the standards are maintained, since you care so much about standards." Patricia let out a strangled sob. She grabbed the plunger and the heavy rubber gloves. As she walked toward the lavatory, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her bun was coming loose. Her makeup was smudged. The crisp, authoritative look she prided herself on was gone, replaced by the harried, exhausted look of a servant. She realized with a sinking dread that the flight was only 2 hours in. She had 5 more hours of this. Around 3 a.m. New York time, the cabin was dark. Most passengers were asleep. Vivien was awake. She had her laptop open, reviewing the due diligence files for Sterling and Company. The numbers were bad. The bank was over-leveraged in commercial real estate. Arthur Sterling had made some poor bets. She needed to use the restroom. In the Boeing 777 first-class suites, there are 2 exclusive lavatories at the front. They are spacious, stocked with designer lotions and real cloth towels. But Vivien didn't go to the front. She stood up, stretched, and began to walk back. She walked through the business-class cabin, where the executives slept in their lie-flat pods. She walked past the premium economy section. She pushed through the curtain into economy. The air changed immediately. It was warmer, stuffier. The rows of sleeping passengers looked uncomfortable, twisted into awkward positions. Vivien walked all the way to the back galley. Patricia was sitting on a jump seat, her head in her hands. She looked broken. When she heard footsteps, she jumped up, smoothing her skirt. When she saw it was Vivien, the blood drained from her face. Mrs. Banks, Patricia stammered. Vivien stood in the galley, the dim blue safety lights casting shadows on her face. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked curious. "Is the coffee fresh?" Vivien asked. What? Patricia blinked. "The coffee. Is it fresh? I have a lot of work to do." Yes. I just brewed a pot." Patricia's hands shook as she reached for a paper cup. "I can bring it to your seat. You shouldn't be back here." "I can be wherever I want, Patricia. I own the lease," Vivien reminded her gently. She took the paper cup. It was hot. "Thank you." She took a sip. It was terrible airline coffee, burnt and bitter. Nothing like the espresso machine in the front. "Why did you do it?" Vivien asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, louder than the engines. Patricia looked down at her shoes. "I told you. I thought you were—" "Don't lie to me," Vivien cut her off. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a judge's gavel. "You saw a black woman in a hoodie, and you decided she was a thief. You decided she was sneaking in. If I had been a white college girl in a hoodie, you would have assumed I was a senator's daughter. If I had been a white man in a hoodie, you would have assumed I was a tech genius. But me, I was a threat." Patricia's lip quivered. "We have security protocols." "It wasn't protocol," Vivien said. "It was prejudice. And the saddest part, Patricia, is that you don't even own the airline. You're an employee, just like the gate agent, just like the baggage handler. You have a little bit of perceived authority, and you used it to punch down. You wanted to make me feel small so you could feel big." Vivien took another step closer. "How does it feel? To be the one scrubbing the toilet? To be the one people snap at?" "It's humiliating," Patricia whispered, tears leaking out. "Good," Vivien said. "Sit with that. Because that is how you made me feel when you pointed your finger at me in front of the whole cabin. You tried to strip me of my dignity. I just stripped you of your status. The difference is, my dignity is internal. Your status was just a scarf and a badge." Vivien turned to leave. "Are you going to fire me?" Patricia asked, her voice trembling. "I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in college." Vivien stopped. She looked back at the woman. "I don't sign your paycheck directly, Patricia. Regal Atlantic does. But I do sign the checks that keep Regal Atlantic flying. What happens to you in London isn't up to me anymore. You started a fire. Now you have to wait and see what burns down." Vivien walked back through the curtain, leaving Patricia alone in the darkness of the rear galley. the sound of the engines roaring in her ears like a coming storm. The descent into London Heathrow was bumpy. Thick grey clouds blanketed the city, and the rain lashed against the windows as the massive bird banked over the Thames. As the wheels touched down with a screech of rubber and the reverse thrusters roared, a palpable tension filled the aircraft. For the passengers, it was just the end of a flight. For the crew, it was the end of an era. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London," Reese announced over the PA system. Her voice was steady, confident. "Local time is 7:15 a.m. Please remain seated until the captain turns off the fasten seatbelt sign." Usually, the lead purser made that announcement. Patricia sat in the rear jump seat, staring at the floor. As the plane taxied, it didn't go to the usual gate at Terminal 3. Instead, the captain came over the intercom. "Folks, this is Captain Ford. We've been directed to a remote stand for deplaning. We have stairs bringing us down to buses. Apologies for the inconvenience." Vivien looked out the window. She saw why they were at a remote stand. 3 black Range Rovers were parked on the wet tarmac, near where the plane was stopping. Standing next to them were 4 men in suits, holding umbrellas. And standing in front of them, looking like he had just swallowed a lemon, was Charles Whitmore. Charles Whitmore was the CEO of Regal Atlantic Airways. He was a man who hated surprises, and he hated losing money. He had been woken up at 2 a.m. London time by his VP of operations, telling him that Vivien Banks, the woman whose leasing company held the debt on 40% of his fleet, had threatened to repossess a plane mid-flight because of a racist purser. He had driven to the airport personally. The stairs connected to the front door, L1. "Everyone remain seated," Captain Ford's voice boomed. "We are going to let our first-class passengers off first." Vivien stood up. She grabbed her battered tote bag. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at Arthur Sterling, who was peering out the window at the Range Rovers with wide eyes. "After you, Arthur," Vivien said politely. No, after you. Ms. Banks," Arthur squeaked. Vivien walked to the door. Reese opened it. The cold, damp London air rushed in. Vivien stepped out onto the top of the stairs. She looked down. Charles Whitmore looked up. He didn't look happy, but when he saw her, he plastered on the most apologetic smile of his life. Vivien walked down the stairs, the metal clanging under her sneakers. "Vivien!" Charles Whitmore stepped forward, ignoring the rain soaking his expensive suit. He extended a hand. "My God, I am so sorry. I cannot believe what I heard. This is unacceptable." Vivien didn't shake his hand. She stopped on the bottom step, looking him in the eye. "Hello, Charles. Nice morning for a crisis, isn't it?" "Vivien, please." Charles gestured to the open door of the lead Range Rover. "Let me take you to the VIP lounge. We can discuss this. We can fix this. I have a letter of apology drafted. I don't want the lounge, Charles," Vivien said. She pointed back up the stairs. "I want you to meet your employee. The one who thinks your first-class product is too good for the likes of me." At that moment, the rest of the passengers began to filter out. But Vivien held up a hand. "Wait," she said. She looked up at Reese, who was standing at the door. "Send Patricia down. Now." There was a pause. Then, Patricia appeared at the doorway. She was still wearing her uniform, but without the scarf, without the jacket. She looked small. She looked down at the tarmac and saw the CEO of the airline standing there. She saw the black cars. She saw Vivien Banks pointing at her. Patricia's knees buckled. She had to grab the railing to stop from falling. "Come down, Patricia," Vivien called out. Her voice carried over the sound of the distant jets. "Your boss wants a word." Patricia walked down the stairs slowly, like a woman walking to the gallows. Every step was a punishment. The passengers behind her, Arthur Sterling, the oil heirs, the senators, were all watching. They knew the gossip had spread through the cabin during the flight. That's the one. That's the racist one. When Patricia reached the tarmac, she couldn't look Charles Whitmore in the eye. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispered, "I can explain." Charles Whitmore looked at her with cold fury. This woman had almost cost him a billion-dollar relationship. She had almost grounded his fleet. "Ms. Miller," Charles said, his voice clipped and British, "you have been with us for 20 years. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. 20 years unblemished record." "Well," Charles looked at Vivien, then back at Patricia. "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to destroy it. You didn't just insult a passenger. You insulted a partner. You insulted the values of this company." Charles reached out his hand. "Give me your badge." Patricia gasped, the rain mixed with the tears running down her face. "Sir, please. It was a mistake. I didn't know who she was." "That is exactly the point," Charles shouted, losing his composure. "You treated her like garbage because you didn't know she was powerful. If she had been a nobody, you would have gotten away with it. That is what I cannot have. I cannot have staff who only treat people with respect when they think they are rich." "Badge, now." Trembling, Patricia unclipped her ID, the one Vivien had mocked earlier. She placed it in Charles's hand. "You are suspended, pending an immediate internal investigation," Charles said. "But do not expect to return. Get in the third car. HR is waiting to take you to the operations center to process your exit." Patricia looked at Vivien one last time. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg. But she saw nothing in Vivien's eyes but a mirror reflecting her own ugly behavior back at her. Patricia lowered her head, walked past the CEO, and climbed into the back of the third car. She sat alone, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in her soul. Vivien watched the car drive away. Then she turned to Charles. "That's a start, Charles," Vivien said. "But we're not done." "Name it," Charles said, wiping rain from his forehead. "Anything." "The passengers on this flight," Vivien said, gesturing to the line of people coming down the stairs. "They had to witness that. They were delayed. They were stressed. I want every single passenger on Flight 902 to receive a full refund of their ticket. Cash, not miles, not vouchers. Cash." Charles's eyes widened. "Vivien, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. The first-class tickets alone. Do I need to call my leasing office again, Charles?" Vivien reached for her phone. "I think G-Vang would look great parked in the desert." Charles sighed. He looked defeated. "Done," he said. "Full refunds for everyone." Vivien smiled. She turned to the passengers who were huddled under the wing, listening. "Did you hear that, everyone?" Vivien shouted. "Mr. Whitmore here is refunding all your tickets. Free flight on Regal Atlantic." A cheer went up from the tired passengers. Arthur Sterling clapped his hands. The mother with the baby cried tears of relief. Vivien turned back to Charles. "And one more thing." "Yes?" "Reese." Vivien pointed up the stairs to the young flight attendant. "Promote her. Lead purser. Effective immediately. She knows how to treat people." Charles looked up at Reese. "Done." Vivien adjusted her tote bag. "All right, Charles. Now you can drive me to the city. I have a bank to buy." The Shard is one of the most imposing buildings in London, a jagged splinter of glass piercing the grey skyline. On the 72nd floor, inside the headquarters of the Helios Group, the air was rarefied and silent. Arthur Sterling stood in the elevator, checking his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked terrible. The bags under his eyes were heavy, and his tie felt like a noose. He had barely slept after the flight. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Vivien Banks in that grey hoodie, calmly threatening to repossess a Boeing 777 mid-air. He stepped out into the reception area. It was all white marble and minimalist art. "Mr. Sterling," the receptionist said without looking up, "Miss Banks is expecting you in boardroom A." Arthur walked down the long corridor. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was here to save his bank, Sterling and Company, from bankruptcy. He needed a £200 million injection of capital, and the only person who could give it to him was the woman he had tried to kick off a plane 12 hours ago. He pushed open the heavy oak doors. Vivien Banks was standing at the head of a massive glass table. She was no longer wearing the hoodie. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit that screamed power. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and she wore a pair of glasses that probably cost more than Arthur's car. But on the table in front of her, sitting incongruously next to a stack of financial reports, was the battered canvas tote bag from the flight. "Sit down, Arthur," Vivien said, without looking up from a file. Arthur sat. He felt like a schoolboy called to the headmaster's office. "Vivien, Miss Banks," Arthur started, his voice trembling. "Before we begin, I must apologize again for my behavior on the flight. It was inexcusable. I was stressed, and I made assumptions I shouldn't have." Vivien closed the file. She took off her glasses and looked at him. Her eyes were dark and unreadable. "You know, Arthur," she began, her voice dangerously soft, "I did a little digging into your bank's culture while we were flying. Do you know what I found?" Arthur swallowed hard. I assume you found our liquidity issues." "I found more than that." Vivien tapped the file. "I found a pattern. Sterling and Company has settled 3 discrimination lawsuits in the last 5 years. You have 0 women on your executive board. Your lending practices show a statistical bias against minority-owned businesses in East London." Arthur went pale. "Ms. Banks, those were isolated incidents. We are working on diversity." "Are you?" Vivien stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "Because yesterday, when you saw me, you didn't see a partner. You saw a nuisance. You saw someone who didn't belong in your world. And you were willing to let a flight attendant throw me off the plane to save yourself 5 minutes." She turned back to him. "That is exactly how you run your bank, Arthur. You judge books by their covers. You undervalue assets because they don't look like what you're used to. And that is why you are bankrupt." Arthur slumped in his chair. She was right. He had missed opportunities because he was too focused on tradition, on the way things are done. "So," Arthur whispered, "you're rejecting the deal. You're letting us fail." "No," Vivien said. Arthur looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. You're not?" "I am going to acquire Sterling and Company," Vivien said, walking back to the table. "I am going to inject the £200 million. I am going to save the jobs of your 400 employees." "Thank you," Arthur breathed, tears of relief welling up. "Thank you, Vivien. I promise I will." "But," Vivien cut him off, her voice turning to steel, "there are conditions." "Anything," Arthur said. "Name it." "First," Vivien held up one finger, "you are stepping down as CEO, effective immediately." Arthur froze. "What? But this is my family's bank. My grandfather founded it." "And his grandson drove it into the ground," Vivien said ruthlessly. "You are out, Arthur. You will receive a severance package, and you will keep your shares, but you will have no voting power and no office." "Second," Vivien continued, ignoring his shock, "I am appointing a new CEO, someone who understands that value comes in many forms." "Who?" Arthur asked weakly. Vivien smiled. It was the same shark smile she had given Patricia. "Me," she said. "I'm taking over. We are rebranding. It will no longer be Sterling and Company. It will be Vanguard Capital. And third," Vivien leaned across the table, "you are going to issue a public statement supporting the acquisition, citing your desire to modernize leadership. You will smile, you will shake my hand, and you will walk away grateful that I didn't let you starve." Arthur stared at her. He realized then that the woman in the hoodie had been the most dangerous person he had ever met. He had judged her, and now she owned him. He stood up slowly. He straightened his tie. He knew he had no choice. The alternative was bankruptcy and ruin. "I understand," Arthur said, his voice hollow. "I accept your terms." Vivien extended her hand. "Good doing business with you, Arthur." He shook it. Her grip was firm, warm, and absolute. "Now," Vivien said, sitting back down and opening her laptop. "Close the door on your way out. I have a bank to fix." Arthur walked out of the room, leaving his family legacy behind in the hands of the woman he had tried to silence. As the heavy doors clicked shut, he realized the irony. He had wanted her off the plane because he thought she didn't pay her way. In the end, she was the only one who could pay his. The real storm didn't hit until 3 days later, while Vivien was busy restructuring her new bank and Charles Whitmore was doing damage control at Regal Atlantic. The internet was doing what it does best, finding a villain. A passenger in seat 2A, a 20-year-old tech influencer named Jax, had recorded the entire incident on the plane. He had been discreet, holding his phone against his chest, but the audio was crystal clear. And the video captured everything: Patricia's screaming, the security guards grabbing Vivien, and the mic drop moment when Vivien revealed who she was. Jax uploaded the video to TikTok with the caption, "Flight attendant tries to kick off her own boss #, Karma #Airline, Karen #Regal Atlantic, #Vivien Banks." It didn't just go viral. It went nuclear. Within 4 hours, the video had 12 million views. By the next morning, it was the #1 trending topic on Twitter worldwide. The comments were brutal. At Flygirl99, "OMG, the way she said, 'Make the call, Patricia,' gave me chills. That is queen energy." At Social Justice, "Warrior, this is what we talk about. Profiling is real. Look at how she treated her just because of a hoodie." At Finance Bro, "Wait, is that Vivien Banks, the billionaire? That flight attendant is done." At Petty Label, "I need a chaotic update. Where is Patricia now? I hope she's cleaning toilets." The media picked it up. CNN, BBC, Fox News. Everyone ran the clip. The headline was everywhere. "Billionaire CEO racially profiled on her own plane. Flight attendant fired." Patricia Miller was sitting in her small apartment in Queens, New York, when her phone started blowing up. She had been suspended, waiting for the union hearing. She thought maybe, just maybe, she could save her job if she claimed stress or medical issues. Then she saw the video. She watched herself screaming. She watched her face twist into that ugly, sneering expression she didn't even recognize. She read the comments. Thousands of strangers calling her a racist, a bully, a Karen. Her phone rang. It was her union representative. "Patty," the rep said, his voice tight. "I just saw the video." "It's taken out of context," Patricia cried. "I was just following protocol." "Patty, stop," the rep sighed. "There is no context that saves this. Regal Atlantic just issued a press release. They are terminating you for gross misconduct and brand damage. Effective immediately. No severance. No pension benefits." "They can't do that," Patricia screamed. "I gave them 20 years. And you gave them a PR nightmare that's tanking their stock price, the rep said. We can't fight this. If we go to arbitration, that video will be Exhibit A. You'll lose. It's over, Patty. The line went dead. Patricia dropped the phone. She looked around her apartment. The silence was deafening. She had lost her career. She had lost her reputation. She would never fly again. No airline would touch her. She was the face of everything wrong with the industry. She went to her laptop and opened LinkedIn, thinking maybe she could find a ground job. Her inbox was full of messages, hate mail, threats, people telling her she deserved it. She shut the laptop. She walked to the window and looked out at the planes taking off from JFK in the distance. She used to look at them with pride, knowing she was part of that world. Now they were just metal tubes in the sky, carrying people who would hate her if they knew her name. Karma hadn't just hit back. It had evicted her. 1 month later, Vivien Banks sat in the first-class lounge at Heathrow, waiting for her flight back to New York. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and jeans. She looked relaxed. She picked up a copy of the Financial Times. The front page featured a photo of her shaking hands with the new board of Vanguard Capital. The headline read, "The New Vanguard. Banks brings diversity and profit to the city." She smiled and turned the page. "Ms. Banks?" Vivien looked up. Standing there was Reese. Reese looked different. She was wearing the navy blue blazer of a lead purser. She had a new scarf, tied perfectly. She radiated confidence. "Hello, Reese," Vivien beamed. "You look wonderful. How is the new role?" "It's amazing," Reese said, her eyes shining. "The crew is happier. The vibe is totally different. We actually enjoy coming to work now. Mr. Whitmore has implemented new training, real training, on bias and customer service." "I'm glad to hear that," Vivien said. "And," Reese hesitated, then lowered her voice, "I wanted to tell you, we all got the bonus." "The bonus?" Vivien raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. Last week, every crew member on that flight, except Patricia, got a $5,000 Customer Excellence bonus in our paychecks. It came from an anonymous donor." Reese smiled, knowing. "Thank you." Vivien took a sip of her tea. "I don't know what you're talking about, Reese, but I'm sure you earned it." "Boarding for Flight 902 to New York is now beginning," the announcer called out. Reese stood up straight. "That's us. Can I escort you to the plane, Miss Banks? I made sure seat 1A is ready for you, and I have a bottle of the 2012 chilled." Vivien stood up, grabbing her tote bag. "Lead the way, Reese." As they walked out of the lounge, heads turned. People whispered, "That's her. That's Vivien Banks." Vivien didn't notice. She wasn't thinking about the fame, or the bank she had bought, or the woman she had destroyed. She was thinking about the future. She was thinking about how power wasn't about shouting the loudest or having the biggest badge. Power was knowing who you were, even when the world tried to tell you otherwise. And as she stepped onto the jet bridge, listening to the roar of the engines of her plane, Vivien Banks knew one thing for sure. She was never flying commercial again. Next week, she was buying a Gulfstream. So what's the real lesson here? It's not just about don't judge a book by its cover. It's about the danger of arrogance. Patricia didn't lose her job because she made a mistake. She lost it because she doubled down on her prejudice when given the chance to correct it. She assumed that her uniform gave her the right to belittle someone else. But in the real world, true power is silent, observant, and often wears a hoodie. Vivien Banks showed us that you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to own the plane. If you enjoyed this story of massive karma and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel growing. Did you think Patricia deserved to lose her pension, or was that too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.